Episode number 12.
The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the torrential rain as Emma Chen squinted through the darkness, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. After a brutal 12-hour shift in the emergency room, all she wanted was to collapse into her bed and forget about the 3 cardiac arrests, 2 overdoses, and one particularly nasty motorcycle accident that had defined her night. The storm had turned the mountain highway into a treacherous ribbon of asphalt, and she was already regretting not staying at the hospital until morning. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the old steel bridge ahead for a split second before plunging everything back into darkness. In that brief moment of clarity, Emma saw something that made her heart skip. A dark shape sprawled across the yellow center line, motionless in the driving rain. She slammed on the brakes, her Honda Civic hydroplaning slightly before coming to a stop, just feet from what she now realized was a person. Emma's medical training kicked in immediately, overriding the voice in her head that screamed about the danger of stopping on a deserted bridge in the middle of nowhere at 2:47 a.m. Grabbing her emergency medical kit from the back seat, a habit that had saved lives before, Emma threw open her door and rushed into the storm. The figure was a man, and even in the darkness she could see the distinctive dress blue uniform of a Marine, though it was torn and soaked with something darker than rainwater. "Sir, can you hear me?" Emma dropped to her knees beside him, her scrubs immediately soaking through. The man's eyes fluttered open, revealing a face that couldn't have been older than 25, with a strong jaw and eyes that held a mixture of pain and desperate urgency. "Ma'am," his voice was barely audible over the thunder. "You have to... the memorial? They're going to..." Emma's hands moved automatically, checking his pulse, rapid and thready, before locating the source of the bleeding. A deep stab wound in his left side just below the ribs. Professional, deliberate. This wasn't a random mugging. "I'm a nurse," she said, applying direct pressure to the wound. "What's your name?" "Sergeant David Cross, ma'am. 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines." His words came in gasps. "Listen to me. There's a bomb. Veterans Memorial Ceremony." Senator Williams. Emma's blood ran cold. The memorial ceremony? She'd seen the news coverage. Hundreds of veterans and their families were gathering at dawn to honor fallen soldiers, with Senator Williams giving the keynote address. It was supposed to be one of the largest gatherings in the state's history. "Who did this to you?" Emma pressed harder against the wound, feeling warm blood seep between her fingers. David's hand shot up, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "My own unit. Staff Sergeant Morrison, Corporal Hayes, Private First Class Rodriguez. They're not who I thought they were." His breathing was becoming more labored. "I found out about the plan yesterday. They tried to silence me. We need to call the police, the FBI." "No." David's grip tightened. "Morrison has contacts everywhere. That's how they've stayed hidden. The bomb is already in place. 2 hours, maybe less." Sigh. Oh, Emma's mind raced. 2 hours. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 5 a.m., just as the sun rose over the memorial. She glanced at her watch. 2:52 a.m. Even if they could get to authorities who weren't compromised, would there be enough time? Thunder crashed overhead, but underneath it, Emma heard something else, the distant rumble of engines. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. David heard it too. His eyes went wide with terror. "They found me. Ma'am, you need to leave. Now, they'll kill you just for being here." Emma looked toward the sound. 3 sets of headlights had appeared at the far end of the bridge, moving toward them with purpose. No one drove that fast in this storm unless they had urgent business. "Can you move?" she asked, already knowing the answer from his pallor and the amount of blood he'd lost. "Not far." "Ma'am, please. I'm already dead. Don't let them make you a casualty too." The vehicles were closer now, and Emma could make out their shapes, black SUVs with tinted windows. Government plates, she'd bet. The kind of vehicles that could go anywhere, do anything, and never be questioned. Emma made a decision that would change everything. Instead of running, she hooked her arms under David's shoulders. "I didn't spend 4 years in nursing school to abandon patients," she grunted, hauling him toward her car. "And I sure as hell didn't take an oath to do no harm just to watch good people die." David was heavier than he looked, dead weight in her arms as she dragged him across the wet asphalt. "You don't understand," he gasped. "These aren't just corrupt soldiers. Morrison's been recruiting for months. They have backing resources. This goes deeper than the first muzzle flash lit up the night like deadly lightning. Emma felt the bullet whine past her ear as she threw herself and David behind her car. The Honda's rear window exploded in a shower of safety glass as more shots rang out. The SUVs had stopped at both ends of the bridge, trapping them in a deadly crossfire. Contact! Target acquired! The voice carried across the bridge, cold and professional. Emma recognized the tone. She'd heard it from military patients before. These weren't panicked criminals. They were trained killers executing a mission. David's radio, clipped to his torn dress blue jacket, crackled to life. "Cross, this is Morrison. You've caused enough trouble. Send the civilian away and this ends quick. Keep fighting and we'll make it slow for both of you." Emma's hands shook as she applied a fresh pressure bandage to David's wound. How many of them? At least 6, maybe more. David's breathing was getting shallower. Morrison's team plus whoever they've recruited locally. We tried to reach for his sidearm, but his hand fell short. "Ma'am, I need you to listen carefully. In my jacket pocket, there's a flash drive. Everything's on there. Bank records, communications, the whole conspiracy. If something happens to me, nothing's happening to you." Emma cut him off, though she could see his life bleeding out onto the bridge deck. "We're both getting out of this." Another volley of gunfire erupted, bullets sparking off the Honda's frame. Emma could hear boots on wet pavement. They were advancing from both sides, coordinating their approach like the trained soldiers they were. David's radio crackled again. 60 seconds, cross. Then we come for you both. Emma looked at the churning river below, then at the approaching killers, then at the dying Marine in her arms. Every option seemed impossible. But as she stared into David's eyes that held not fear for himself, but desperate concern for the hundreds of innocent people who would die if his warning went unheeded, Emma realized there was one choice they hadn't considered, one choice that was absolutely insane, one choice that might just work. "David," she whispered, "how well can you swim?" His eyes widened as he understood her meaning. "Ma'am, that's a 40-foot drop into floodwaters. The current will carry us downstream away from them." Emma was already calculating angles, distances, survival odds, and they'll think we're dead. We might actually be dead. Emma smiled grimly as she helped him toward the driver's seat. Then we'll die trying to save lives instead of hiding behind a car waiting to be executed. The radio crackled one final time. "Time's up." Emma gunned the engine, and the Honda Civic shot forward through the bridge's guardrail, carrying 2 unlikely allies into the darkness below and into a race against time that would determine the fate of hundreds of innocent people. For a terrifying moment, she thought she'd lost her grip on David, but her other arm held firm around his chest. Using every ounce of strength she had left, Emma hauled them both toward the shore, using the tree as an anchor against the current. They collapsed onto a narrow strip of muddy bank, both of them coughing up river water. Emma immediately rolled David onto his side, checking his airway and pulse. His breathing was labored but steady, and the bleeding from his stab wound had slowed. The cold water had acted as a natural compress. But they weren't safe yet. The flashlights were getting closer, and Emma could hear voices calling out over the storm. "Sweep the banks! They couldn't have gone far in this current!" Morrison wants confirmation. No body, no mission complete. Emma looked around desperately. They were in a small cove, partially hidden by overhanging trees, but it wouldn't conceal them for long. David's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. "Emma," his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here. We made it." She helped him sit up against a fallen log. "But they're still hunting us." "Can you move?" David tried to stand, but immediately collapsed back down, his face gray with pain. "The flash drive," he gasped, patting his jacket pocket. "Still there." Emma checked. The waterproof case had protected the device. "Got it. But David, we need to get out of here." "How far to the memorial?" 5 miles, maybe 6. He pointed weakly upstream. "But there's an old ranger station. Half a mile through those woods. Might have communication equipment." The flashlights were closer now, maybe 100 yards away. Emma could make out individual voices, coordinating their search pattern with military precision. They had minutes at most before being discovered. "Can you walk?" she asked. David gritted his teeth and managed to get to his feet, leaning heavily on Emma's shoulder. "I can try." They stumbled into the tree line just as the first flashlight beam swept across their hiding spot. Emma's heart hammered as she heard Morrison's voice closer than she'd expected. Fresh tracks in the mud, they made it to shore. How the hell did they survive that fall? Doesn't matter. Fan out. Fan out. Check every tree, every rock. They're wounded and hypothermic. They can't have gone far. Emma guided David deeper into the woods, trying to move as quietly as possible despite his labored breathing and occasional stumble. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot in the darkness, and she was certain their pursuers would hear them. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they emerged into a small clearing where an old log cabin sat dark and abandoned. The ranger station David had mentioned, their potential salvation. "Please tell me this place has a radio," Emma whispered as she helped David up the front steps. The door was locked, but Emma found a loose window around back. She boosted David through first, then climbed in after him, both of them collapsing onto the dusty floor. The cabin was small and spartanly furnished, a desk, some chairs, filing cabinets, and most importantly, a radio set up in the corner. But when Emma tried the power switch, nothing happened. "Generator," David gasped, pointing toward a door that led to what looked like a utility room. "Should be. Backup power." Emma found the generator and pulled the starter cord. Nothing. She tried again and again, her desperation growing with each failed attempt. On the fourth try, the engine coughed to life and lights flickered on throughout the cabin. She rushed back to the radio, but her heart sank when she saw the complexity of the equipment. Military frequencies, encryption protocols, call signs she didn't recognize. "I don't know how to use this," she said, panic creeping into her voice. David dragged himself over to the radio desk, his movements getting weaker by the minute. 7-7 Alpha, he wheezed. "Emergency frequency. Military police." Emma adjusted the dials as David instructed, but when she keyed the microphone, all she got was static. She tried different frequencies, different settings, but nothing worked. "They're jamming us," David realized, his face pale. "Morrison's team. They're blocking communications." Emma stared at the useless radio, then at David, who was clearly fading fast. Outside, she could hear the distant sound of vehicles. Their pursuers had found the ranger station. "How long until the ceremony?" she asked. David checked his waterlogged watch. 43 minutes. 43 minutes to travel 6 miles, warn hundreds of people, and stop a terrorist attack, all while being hunted by trained killers and carrying a wounded Marine who could barely stand. Emma looked around the cabin and spotted something that made her pulse quicken. Keys hanging on a hook by the door with a tag that read ATV-1. "David," she said, a desperate plan forming in her mind. "How do you feel about off-road racing?" Before he could answer, the sound of approaching engines grew louder, and Emma realized they were about to find out just how far she was willing to go to save innocent lives. The real chase was about to begin. The ATV roared to life on the second pull, its engine echoing through the small utility shed behind the ranger station. Emma had found the four-wheeler exactly where the keys suggested, a battered but functional Yamaha Grizzly that looked like it had seen better decades but still had fight left in it. "Pro, can you hold on?" she asked David as she helped him climb onto the seat behind her. His face was ashen, and she could feel him trembling against her back, but his grip around her waist was surprisingly strong. "Do I have a choice?" he managed, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. Through the shed's small window, Emma could see flashlight beams dancing between the trees, getting closer by the second. Morrison's team had found their trail and was closing in fast. She gunned the throttle, and the ATV burst through the shed's rear door, sending splinters flying as they crashed into the forest. "Which way?" Emma shouted over the engine and wind. David's arm came around her shoulder, pointing northeast. "Trail follows the ridge line, faster than the roads." But dangerous in this weather. Dangerous was an understatement. The narrow dirt trail was slick with mud and fallen leaves, winding through dense forest with drops that disappeared into darkness on one side and steep rock faces on the other. Emma had ridden ATVs before during her college years, but never in conditions like this. Never with a dying man clinging to her back, and certainly never while being pursued by military-trained killers. Behind them, she could hear the roar of more powerful engines. The black SUVs had found another route and were paralleling their course on a service road below. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of headlights through the trees, keeping pace despite the rough terrain. How much further? She called back to David. 3 miles, maybe 4. His voice was getting weaker and she could feel his grip loosening. Emma, if I don't make it, you're making it. She cut him off, taking a sharp turn that sent gravel spraying into the darkness. We both are. The trail suddenly opened into a clearing. Emma's heart stopped. One of the black SUVs sat directly in their path, its occupants already out and taking positions behind the vehicle. Muzzle flashes erupted in the darkness as bullets whined past their heads. Emma yanked the handlebars hard left, sending the ATV into a controlled skid that carried them behind a cluster of boulders just as more gunfire erupted. David groaned as the impact jarred his wounded side, but he managed to stay conscious. There's another trail, he gasped, pointing to what looked like a deer path leading up the steep hillside. Connects to the main route, but it's narrow. Emma looked at the path, barely wide enough for the ATV, with a gradient that would challenge even an experienced rider. But it was their only option. The alternative was a firefight they couldn't win. She revved the engine and aimed for the trail, feeling the rear wheels spin for traction as they climbed. The ATV bucked and lurched over rocks and roots, threatening to throw them both off with every bump. David's breathing was becoming more labored, and Emma could feel warm wetness soaking through her shirt where his wound was pressed against her back. Stay with me, David, she urged. Tell me about the bomb. Where exactly is it placed? Memorial Wall, he managed between gasps. Behind the main speaker platform. Morrison's team. They've been planning this for months. The senator's speech. It's supposed to be the signal. Emma's mind raced as she navigated a particularly treacherous section of trail. What kind of device? Military grade, C4 with a remote detonator. Enough to level half the memorial. David's voice was fading, but he forced himself to continue. The flash drive, it has everything. Bank records showing payments from a domestic terrorist cell. Communications proving the conspiracy goes all the way to Washington. They crested the ridge just as the sun began to show the first hints of dawn on the horizon. Below them, Emma could see the Veterans Memorial, a sprawling complex of granite walls, bronze statues, and ceremonial gardens. Even from this distance, she could make out the early arrivals. Veterans in their dress uniforms, families carrying flowers, honor guards preparing for the ceremony. Hundreds of innocent people gathering to honor their fallen heroes, completely unaware that they were walking into a death trap. 37 minutes, David whispered, checking his watch again. Emma spotted the service road that would take them down to the memorial, but her heart sank when she saw more black SUVs positioned along the route. Morrison's team had anticipated their destination and set up a perimeter. They're everywhere, she said, scanning for alternatives. There. David pointed with a shaking hand toward a maintenance access road that wound around the back of the memorial complex. Groundskeeper's entrance. Should be. Unguarded. For all. Emma aimed the ATV down the steep slope, using engine braking to control their descent. The maintenance road was barely more than 2 tire tracks through the grass, but it offered concealment from the main approaches. As they got closer to the memorial, Emma could hear the sound of a military band warming up, the cheerful notes of patriotic songs creating a surreal contrast to their desperate mission. They reached the groundskeeper's shed without being spotted, and Emma helped David off the ATV. He immediately collapsed against the building's wall, his face gray and slick with sweat. I can't go much further, he admitted, his breathing shallow and rapid. Emma knelt beside him, checking his pulse. It was weak and irregular. He was going into shock from blood loss. Where's the bomb, exactly? Behind the speaker platform, there's a maintenance panel in the memorial wall. Morrison hid it there during yesterday's security sweep. David fumbled in his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a garage door opener. This is the disarming remote, but it requires 2 people to activate. Safety protocol. Emma stared at the device, then at David, then at the memorial complex beyond the trees. She could see the speaker platform now, a raised wooden structure decorated with red, white, and blue bunting. Senator Williams would be standing there in less than 30 minutes. addressing a crowd of veterans and their families completely unaware that a bomb was hidden just feet away. "How does it work?" she asked. "Two buttons." "But Emma." David grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Morrison's team will be watching the platform. The moment they see us, they'll detonate manually." Emma looked around the groundskeeper's shed and spotted something that gave her an idea: a maintenance uniform hanging on a hook, complete with a baseball cap and work gloves. It might provide enough disguise to get close to the platform. "What about the authorities?" she asked. "Can't we call in a bomb threat?" David shook his head weakly. "Morrison has people inside the security detail. A bomb threat would just trigger an evacuation, and they detonate during the chaos to maximize casualties." The sound of vehicles approaching made them both freeze. Through the trees, Emma could see two of the black SUVs slowly patrolling the perimeter, their occupants scanning the area with military precision. "They're tightening the net," David whispered, "looking for us." Emma made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She grabbed the maintenance uniform and started pulling it on over her wet clothes. "What are you doing?" David asked. "Creating a diversion," she replied, tucking her hair under the baseball cap. "You said they need to see us to trigger the manual detonation, right? Well, they're going to see me. But while they're focused on stopping me, you're going to crawl to that platform and find the bomb." "Emma!" "No. You don't understand. These aren't just corrupt soldiers. Morrison's team has been recruited by a domestic terrorist organization. They won't hesitate to kill civilians. Then we better make sure they don't get the chance." Emma checked David's wound one more time, applying a fresh pressure bandage from her medical kit. "And you make it to the platform?" David looked at the distance, maybe 50 yards through scattered trees and memorial gardens. In his condition, it would be like climbing Mount Everest, but he nodded grimly. "Give me 5 minutes," Emma said, "then start moving. And David, when you get to that bomb, you better know how to disarm it, because I have a feeling we're only going to get one shot at this." As she prepared to step into the open and draw the attention of trained killers, Emma Chin realized that her quiet life as a small-town emergency room nurse was about to become anything but quiet. The final phase of their desperate mission was about to begin. Emma took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the groundskeeper's shed, her heart hammering against her ribs as she walked purposefully toward the memorial's main plaza. The maintenance uniform felt like a flimsy disguise, but it was all she had. In the growing dawn light, she could see the ceremony preparations in full swing. Veterans arranging chairs, honor guards practicing their formations, and families beginning to gather near the speaker platform where Senator Williams would soon address the crowd. She forced herself to walk normally, carrying a rake she'd grabbed from the shed as a prop. Just another groundskeeper doing early morning maintenance. Nothing suspicious here, but she could feel eyes on her immediately. "Contact!" A voice crackled from a radio somewhere nearby. "Unknown maintenance worker approaching the platform. Doesn't match our personnel roster." Anna's blood ran cold, but she kept walking. Behind her, she could hear David beginning his agonizing crawl toward the platform, using the memorial's landscaping for cover. Every second she could buy him was precious. "Ma'am!" A voice called out behind her. "Ma'am, stop right there!" Emma turned to see a man in a security uniform jogging toward her, but something was wrong with the picture. His uniform was too new, his posture too military, and his hand was resting on his sidearm in a way that suggested he was ready to use it. One of Morrison's people. "Sorry," Emma called back, affecting a casual tone. "Just trying to get the grounds cleaned up before the ceremony starts." Big day today. The fake security guard was closer now, close enough that Emma could see the suspicion in his eyes. "I'm going to need to see some identification." "Sure thing." Emma reached into her pocket as if going for ID, but instead pulled out her cell phone and hit the emergency call button. Even if Morrison's team was jamming military frequencies, they couldn't block 911 calls without drawing unwanted attention. 911, what's your emergency? "Bomb threat at the Veterans Memorial," Emma shouted into the phone. "Armed terrorists on site. Send everything you have." The fake guard's eyes went wide, and his hand moved toward his weapon. But Emma was already running, sprinting toward the speaker platform as chaos erupted around her. "All units, we are compromised." Morrison's voice boomed from multiple radios. "Execute contingency plan! Detonate on my mark!" Emma could see the real security personnel now, confused and scrambling as they tried to process what was happening. Some were reaching for their radios, others were moving to intercept her, but none of them understood the true scope of the threat. Behind the platform, she caught a glimpse of David dragging himself across the grass, leaving a trail of blood as he fought to reach the memorial wall. He was maybe 20 yards from the hidden bomb, but Emma could see more of Morrison's people converging on his position. "There," someone shouted. "The wounded Marine. He's going for the device." Gunfire erupted across the memorial grounds as Morrison's team abandoned all pretense of being legitimate security. Real police officers and security personnel dove for cover, finally understanding that they were under attack. Civilians screamed and scattered as bullets whined through the air. Emma reached the speaker platform and vaulted onto the stage, grabbing the microphone from its stand. Her voice boomed across the memorial complex through the PA system. "Everyone get down. This is not a drill. There is a bomb hidden behind this platform. Evacuate immediately." The effect was instantaneous. Hundreds of people who had been milling around the memorial suddenly understood the danger and began running for the exits. But Emma knew that Morrison's team would use the chaos to their advantage. They could detonate the bomb during the evacuation and still cause massive casualties. A bullet splintered the wooden platform inches from her feet, and Emma dove behind the podium as more shots rang out. Through the gaps in the platform skirting, she could see David had reached the memorial wall and was frantically searching for the maintenance panel. "Emma? Emma?" His voice carried across the gunfire. "I found it, but I need you here. The disarming sequence requires 2 people." Emma looked around desperately. Between her and David lay 30 yards of open ground, with at least 3 of Morrison's people positioned to cut down anyone who tried to cross. The real security forces were engaged in firefights at the perimeter, but they were outnumbered and outgunned by the well-prepared terrorists. Then she saw something that gave her hope. A groundskeeper's cart loaded with bags of mulch, positioned about halfway between her location and David's. If she could reach it, she might be able to use it as mobile cover. "David!" she shouted. 30 seconds. Be ready." Emma sprinted from the platform, zigzagging as bullets kicked up dirt around her feet. She dove behind the cart just as a sustained burst of automatic fire shredded the air where she'd been standing. The mulch bags were already leaking from bullet holes, but they provided enough concealment for her to catch her breath. "Morrison to all units." The radio chatter continued. "Forget the targets. Detonate now. Maximum casualties. Negative," another voice responded. "The disarming remote is active." Someone's interfering with the signal. Emma realized that David must have activated his part of the disarming sequence, but without her input, the bomb was still live. She had to reach him, and she had maybe seconds before Morrison's team found another way to trigger the explosion. She grabbed the cart's handle and began pushing it toward David's position, using it as a shield while bullets hammered into the mulch bags. The cart was heavy and unwieldy, but it was moving, carrying her closer to the memorial wall with each desperate step. "Emma, hurry!" David's voice was weak but urgent. "The timer's active. We have less than a minute." 15 yards. 10. 5. Emma abandoned the cart and dove the final distance, landing hard beside David behind the memorial wall. He was pale as death, his uniform soaked with blood, but his eyes were focused and determined. He pressed a small device into her hands. It looked like a modified garage door opener with 2 red buttons. "We have to press them at exactly the same time. Hold for 3 seconds, then release together." Emma could hear Morrison's voice getting closer, coordinating his team's final assault. "Surround the wall. Don't let them complete the sequence. Ready?" David asked, his finger poised over one button while Emma positioned hers over the other. "Ready. On 3. 1, 2. A figure appeared around the corner of the memorial wall, Staff Sergeant Morrison himself, his face twisted with rage as he raced an assault rifle toward them. 3. Emma and David pressed their buttons simultaneously just as Morrison opened fire. The bullets struck the granite wall above their heads, sending chips of stone raining down on them as they held the buttons for what felt like an eternity. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. They released the buttons together, and immediately a green light appeared on David's device. But Morrison was adjusting his aim, and Emma could see his finger tightening on the trigger. David threw himself in front of Emma just as Morrison fired again. The impact spun David around, and he collapsed against the memorial wall, blood spreading across his chest. But the bomb was disarmed. Emma heard the distant wail of sirens, real police, real FBI, real bomb disposal units responding to her 911 call. Morrison heard them too, and for a moment his face showed the first hint of uncertainty she'd seen. "It's over, Morrison," Emma shouted, cradling David's head in her lap. "The bomb's disarmed, the authorities are here, and that flash drive has everything. Your whole operation is blown." Morrison's eyes flicked between Emma, the approaching sirens, and his remaining team members, who were already beginning to scatter as the sound of helicopters filled the air. "This isn't over," he snarled, but he was already backing away, his bravado cracking as the reality of his situation set in. Emma didn't watch him go. All her attention was focused on David, whose breathing was becoming more labored by the second. "Hey," she whispered, applying pressure to his new wound. "Stay with me. The cavalry's coming." David's eyes found hers, and despite everything, he managed a weak smile. Did we save them?" Emma looked around at the memorial grounds, where hundreds of people were now safely evacuating under the protection of arriving law enforcement. In the distance, she could see bomb disposal experts moving toward their position, ready to secure the disarmed device. "Yeah," she said, tears mixing with the dirt and blood on her face. "We saved them all." As the first paramedics reached their position, Emma realized that the longest night of her life was finally coming to an end. But somehow, she suspected that the most important part of her story was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Emma stood in her small apartment bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror as she tried to work up the courage to answer the persistent knocking at her front door. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the confident nurse who had walked into the hospital for her shift that stormy night. Her shoulder was still in a sling from the bullet graze she'd sustained during the firefight, and the dark circles under her eyes spoke to the sleepless nights filled with nightmares and debriefings. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, followed by a voice she didn't recognize. "Chen, this is Colonel Martinez, United States Marine Corps. We'd like a word with you, ma'am." Emma's heart skipped. She'd been expecting this visit ever since David had been transferred from the local hospital to Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington. The FBI had debriefed her extensively about the events at the memorial, and she'd testified before a closed congressional committee about the conspiracy that David's flash drive had exposed. But she hadn't heard from the Marines directly. She opened the door and immediately stepped back in shock. Her entire front yard was filled with Marines in dress blue uniforms, standing at perfect attention in formation. At their head stood a distinguished-looking Hispanic woman with silver eagles on her collar, Colonel Martinez, and beside her, leaning heavily on a cane but very much alive, was David Cross. "Miss Chen," Colonel Martinez said formally, "by order of the Commandant of the Marine Corps, you are hereby summoned to receive recognition for extraordinary heroism in the face of enemy action." Emma's mouth fell open. What? Here, now?" David stepped forward, his face still pale but his eyes bright with something she hadn't seen before. Peace. "Emma, you saved more than just my life that night. The intelligence on that flash drive led to the arrest of 17 conspirators across 4 states. We uncovered a domestic terrorist network that was planning attacks on military installations nationwide." "But I'm not military," Emma protested, suddenly aware that she was wearing old jeans and a faded college sweatshirt while surrounded by Marines in full dress uniform. "I'm just a nurse who risked everything to save innocent lives," Colonel Martinez interrupted, who faced down trained killers without hesitation, who refused to abandon a wounded Marine even when it meant putting herself in mortal danger. The colonel's voice softened slightly. "Ms. Chen, what you did that night exemplifies the highest traditions of service and sacrifice. The fact that you're not military makes it even more remarkable." Emma noticed movement at the edge of her yard and realized that neighbors were gathering, drawn by the unusual sight of a Marine honor guard in their quiet suburban neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson from next door was recording everything on her phone, and the Johnson kids were staring wide-eyed at the formation of Marines. "Ma'am," David said quietly. "Would you step outside? There's something we'd like to present to you." Emma walked onto her front porch, still feeling surreal about the entire situation. Colonel Martinez opened a wooden presentation case and withdrew a medal Emma didn't recognize. A bronze star suspended from a ribbon of navy blue with thin stripes of white and red. "Emma Chen," Colonel Martinez announced in a voice that carried across the neighborhood. "By direction of the Secretary of the Navy, you are hereby awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism. This medal is presented for heroic conduct, not involving actual conflict with an enemy of the United States. Your actions on the night of November 15th demonstrated exceptional courage and disregard for personal safety in saving the lives of hundreds of innocent civilians." As the colonel pinned the medal to Emma's sweatshirt, the assembled Marines came to attention and rendered a crisp salute. Emma stood frozen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. She'd never imagined that her split-second decision to help a wounded stranger would lead to this. "There's more," David said, stepping forward again. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small purple heart-shaped medal that Emma recognized immediately. The Purple Heart awarded to those wounded in combat. "David, no," Emma whispered, understanding what he was about to do. "That's yours. You earned it." "I earned it by getting stabbed by my own people because I was too trusting to see the corruption around me," David replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You earned it by taking a bullet while saving lives, by putting yourself between innocent people and terrorists, by doing what I should have done from the beginning, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves." He pinned the Purple Heart next to the Navy and Marine Corps medal, his hands shaking slightly. "This belongs to you more than it ever belonged to me." Emma felt tears streaming down her face as the weight of both medals settled against her chest. Around her, she could hear the soft sounds of her neighbors, some crying, others applauding quietly, all of them witnessing something extraordinary happening in their ordinary neighborhood. "Speech!" Someone called out from the crowd and others took up the call. Emma looked around at the faces surrounding her. Marines who had traveled hundreds of miles to honor her, neighbors who had known her for years, but were seeing her in an entirely new light, and Dave, whose life she had saved, but who had given her something far more valuable in return. The knowledge that when the moment came, she had chosen courage over safety. "I'm not good at speeches," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Then louder. "3 weeks ago, I was just a nurse driving home from work. I saw someone who needed help, and I stopped. That's all. I didn't think about heroism or medals or recognition. I couldn't drive past someone who was hurt." She paused, looking directly at David. "But what I learned that night is that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. Thinks about ordinary people making extraordinary choices when the moment demands it." Emma's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Every day there are people in our communities, nurses, teachers, firefighters, police officers, soldiers, who make those choices, who put others before themselves, who run toward danger instead of away from it. I'm honored to receive these medals, but I'm accepting them on behalf of all those everyday heroes who never get recognized." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing off the houses and carrying down the street. As it died down, Colonel Martinez stepped forward one final time. "Ms. Chen, there's one more thing. The Marine Corps would like to offer you a position as a civilian trauma specialist at our training facility in Quantica. Your medical expertise, combined with your proven ability to perform under extreme pressure, would be invaluable in preparing our Marines for combat situations." Emma's eyes widened. A job offer from the Marines? It was the last thing she'd expected. "Of course, take all the time you need." Colonel Martinez handed her a business card. "When you're ready, give me a call." As the ceremony concluded and the Marines began to disperse, David lingered behind. The crowd of neighbors gradually drifted away, leaving them alone on Emma's front porch. "How are you feeling?" Emma asked, her nurse's instincts kicking in as she noticed the way he was favoring his left side. "Better every day. The doctors say I'll make a full recovery." David smiled, thanks to a certain nurse who refused to let me bleed out on a bridge. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them processing everything that had happened. Finally, David spoke again. Emma, I know this might sound crazy, but would you like to have coffee sometime? I mean, when I'm not bleeding and you're not being shot at. Emma laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in weeks. You know what? I'd like that. But I'm buying. It's the least I can do for someone who gave me his Purple Heart. Deal, David said, extending his hand. But next time we meet, let's make sure there are no bombs involved. Next time, Emma raised an eyebrow as she shook his hand. Well, David grinned, I was hoping there might be a next time, and maybe a time after that. I figure I owe you about 1,000 conversations for saving my life. As Emma watched David walk back to the waiting Marine vehicles, she touched the medals on her chest and realized that her quiet life as a small-town nurse had changed forever. But for the first time since that stormy night, she was looking forward to finding out what came next. The woman who had risked everything to save a stranger had discovered that sometimes the greatest rewards come not from the recognition you receive, but from the person you become in the process of earning it. And as David's car disappeared around the corner, Emma Chen smiled and went inside to make some coffee, already looking forward to their first conversation that didn't involve life or death situations. Though knowing David, she suspected even their coffee dates might be more adventurous than most.